Hey, what's up guys? Tim here, and I just want to say thank you first of all for staying with me these past couple weeks. I know I haven't posted in a while, but it's because my wife and I have been celebrating the birth of our son. And so we've just been at home these past couple weeks, enjoying that time together, and it's been really great. So I'm excited to get back in today though with our looping tutorials and continuing on that series. So today we have a client requested loop, and I'm excited to walk you through that process from start to finish. As always, we're going to be in After Effects with the default layout, no third-party plugins or effects. And so with that, let's open up AE and jump in and get going. All right, so we are over here in After Effects, and I just want to say, as always, thank you all for following along and learning and just creating together. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate your patience again with this little break, but back on it, and I'm excited for what's to come. So with this tutorial, I'm going to show you kind of the client brief. These are the project details, and the client wanted kind of this abstract stormy look where it loops, maybe some light bursting through, and some good hues and tones that kind of look stormy. And so I want to show you and walk you through kind of the process of the delivered final file and loop that we made for this. So it honestly isn't too hard to make, but I think we're going to learn a few things, especially with how to loop and some other plugins that we maybe haven't used before. So as always, we're in the default layout, and let's go ahead and make a new composition here. So I'm going to go to new comp, and I'm going to name this bass. And on the width, I actually made this one in 4K. I know we usually do 1920 by 1080 HD, but I'm going to kind of just walk you through the 4K process here. And so I'm going to type in on the width 3840 and the height 2160 square pixels. And on the frame rate, let's change that from 30 to 60, or maybe you have it on a different frame rate. Let's put that at 60 frames per second, because we're actually going to slow this thing down in our next comp. The movement's pretty fast initially, and so we want to kind of slow this down. So the duration, let's change this to 10 seconds, and let's hit OK. And so we have our 4K comp right here, right in the middle. And we're going to just base this off of one white solid. So down here in my timeline, I'm going to right-click, New, Solid. And we have white solid 1. I'm going to hit Make Comp Size just to make sure we're at 3840 by 2160. And white solid, and let's hit OK. And so we have this white solid here, and our first effect is going to be a fractal noise effect. So I'm going to come over to my effects and presets and go to Fractal Noise, and let's double click on that. And we have our Fractal Noise plugin right here. So I'm going to go through this and just give you the values that work for me and to get me the end result for this deliverable. But as always, do what you want to do with this, make it your own, and play around with it to get a fun, unique look. So on the fractal type, I'm going to change from basic to dynamic. Noise type, we can keep that at soft linear. I'm going to click on to invert this. And so on contrast, let's change this to 140. And the brightness, I'm going to drop that to -40. I'm going to drop down this transform right here. And on the scale, I want to bump this way up. So we're at default 100. I'm going to kick that up to 700, kind of crop in more on this. So that's kind of all we need to do on our transform here. Complexity, I'm actually going to twirl up transform complexity. We'll leave that at 6. And then all we're going to do is animate this evolution. We've definitely used evolution before and using fractal noise, and I think it's just a great way to get some bass movement to this thing. So same thing here. My playhead down on my timeline at 0 frames, 0 seconds. I'm going to click that stopwatch on evolution and making sure that that's at the 0, 0. And I'm going to drag my playhead all the way to the end to the 10-second mark. And on my revolutions, I'm going to change that from 0 to 5. So we're going to go 360 degrees 5 times. Make sure you're not on that 5 degrees because it would be no movement really at all. So let me scrub through this here, and you can see we're getting kind of those variations as we play through. So I will warn you, since this is 4K, it may get a little render heavy. So I'm going to drop my resolution to 1/4. And that's kind of all we need to do on our fractal noise. So one last thing, when we work with evolution here, we always want to twirl down evolution options and click cycle evolution. And all that does is make the first frame and the last frame the same so that we get a perfect loop. That looks good. Let's twirl up evolution and everything. And I'm going to twirl up fractal noise as a whole because we're going to add one more plugin to this white solid. So let's come back over here. I'm going to type in Mr. Mercury, and I'll pull up CC Mr. Mercury. And this is a fun one, so I'm going to double click and have it apply right underneath here. It's a generator, so it starts off with nothing and kind of generates over time, and you can see that there. It already gives you a cool like metallic-y liquid look, which is fun in itself, but maybe we'll do a tutorial on that a different time. But for us, this is really going to help us achieve the effect of the cloud. So this kind of ruins our loop, obviously, because if I go to the end here, it ends there, and then it starts with nothing. So we'll fix that here in a second. I'll kind of show you what we need to do there. So let's change these settings. On the radius X, I'm going to change that to 6, and then Y, I'm going to keep that at 5. The producer will keep that the same, all that. With the velocity here, let's go ahead and change that to 5. And if I scrub in here, we can kind of see the change here. So if I go back to 1, you know, we're kind of pouring down here and all the velocity is going downward. If I change that to 5 where we want it, it's kind of coming at our screen now. So that looks great. Birth rate, I'm going to change that from 1 to 4. You get some more elements on the screen. Longevity, we're going to go from 2 to 10. Gravity, let's change that from 1, and we're going to drop that to 0.4. Looks great. Resistance, let's kind of turn that up to 0.71. And now we are getting a lot of resistance on the screen. We're not pouring down so much, which is great. I kind of really love this look, honestly. Yeah, I'll have to do a tutorial in the future on playing around with this effect. So, but not today. Extra, we'll keep that at 1. In our animation, let's change that from explosive to twirl. We're going to kind of twirl at the screen. Looks great. 100% on blob influence. And then on the influence map, I'm going to change that to constant blobs. Kind of see what's happening there. Constantly on the screen. And birth size, let's change that to 1. And death size, change that to 1 as well. And you can see it kind of almost looks like we're defaulted back, but right here on the edges, we're getting that Mercury effect. So that's what we want. Like I said, this is really going to help us achieve that effect here. So on our light right here, let's twirl down light. And all I'm going to do is change that from effect light to AE lights because we're going to use a spotlight here. So twirl that back up. And then on shading, all I'm going to do here is change that ambient from 100 and drop it down to 47. That's all we need to do for the values here. But like I said, we kind of lost our loop. So let's go ahead and fix that. What we're going to do is basically shorten this layer, find a spot where it is fully on screen, all the motion's going, everything, and we're going to cut it and trim it right there. So looks like probably right around like, let's go like 725. So we're 7 seconds and 25 frames in, and I'm going to go on my keyboard and hit Option or Alt and the left bracket. And that's basically trimming our layer to the 7 second and 25 frame mark. And holding down Shift, I'm going to click and drag this so that that new cut point meets up to the beginning at 0 frames, 0 seconds. The problem here is that now our layer is super short. So all we're going to do is take our playhead to the end here, 10-second mark, and I'm going to hit Option or Alt on your keyboard and the right bracket, and we're just going to extend that layer all the way to the end there. So one more problem to fix. As you can see, our movement stops where that layer had cut off originally. So if I hit U on my keyboard with this white solid selected, it'll bring up the effects that we have keyframed. And if you remember, we keyframed that evolution. And so what's happening is originally this keyframe was at the end here. And what we need is that evolution to start and begin at the correct points in this comp again. So all we need to do for this is I'm going to click on this evolution property right here, down on my timeline. What this is doing is selecting all the keyframes that are active. Although we can't see that first one, it's still selecting it way off the screen here. So with this keyframe right here, and making sure that I've clicked evolution, I'm going to click and hold and drag while holding shift and take that back to the 10-second mark. And you can see now that it brought our first keyframe back on the screen. And so if I scrub through, we're back to having that 5 times of movement on the revolutions here. So I'm going to take my playhead back to 0 frames 0 seconds. And we are done with our white solid, at least for now. So I'm going to twirl up my white solid, go up here and twirl up Mr. Mercury. And let's move on to making that spotlight. So down here in my timeline, I'm going to right click, new, light. And in our light type, if it's not on spot, change that to spotlight. And then everything else can stay the same. Let's hit OK. I'm going to twirl down my spotlight, twirl down transform, and I'm going to run you through these values real quick here. So point of interest on the X, I'm going to change that to 2211.5. On the Y, I'm going to change that to 788.5. And on the Z, I'm going to change that to -2430. And then on the position down here, on the X, let's change that to 2371.5. On the Y, I'm going to go to 628.5. And on the Z, let's go -3763.5. And I'm going to twirl up my transform here and twirl down my light options. And let's brighten this up. So intensity is at 100. We're going to crank this way up to 370. On our color, I'm going to click that color box and change it from white to 2B6EFF. Get a nice blue in there. That looks good. And on our cone angle, let's drop this to 60 degrees. And then the rest of this can stay the same. This looks good. Well, let's maybe feather this a little out, maybe a little harsher here. Let's go from 50% to 25%. This looks great. The spotlight is in place. I'm going to twirl that up. And one thing we're going to add to this whole comp right here is some light. So if you remember that directive from the client, they were just like, we wanted some light bursting through a little bit. This is where we're going to add that. So I'm going to right click down on my timeline, new adjustment layer. And right off the bat, I'm going to name this adjustment layer light burst so that we know what effect we have on here. Before we add the effect, we're going to change the blending mode of this adjustment layer. So it's right here. You'll see your mode panel. If you don't see that, go ahead down here and hit toggle switches and modes until it pulls up, and you'll see that mode panel pull up. So it's set to normal. I'm going to click on that and change it to lighten. Nothing's going to happen because we don't have the effect on it, but you'll see how that interacts here in a second. So with our light burst layer selected, I'm going to come over to my effects and presets, and I'm going to type in light burst. Pull up CC light burst 2.5. I'm going to double click on that. You can see now we already have some cool looks to this. It almost already looks like the clouds and the light coming through. But we're going to adjust this in a very minor way right here. So on the intensity, we're just going to drop that to 40. Everything else can stay the same here, and we'll just move on. But you can see with that light burst how much detail that adds, just pulling out all those highlights, giving it that light. So nothing else we need to do on this base layer. You can kind of see where we're going here. I love how those clouds just kind of start peeking out and morphing, get those light bursts coming through. So let's move on to our render layer. I'm going to come back over to my project panel. I'm going to hit that new comp icon, and let's name this render. Same dimensions, 3840 by 2160. But on our frame rate now, I'm actually going to change this to 30 frames per second. And then on our duration, I'm going to change this to 20 seconds long. And if you remember at the beginning, I said we're going to slow this down because that movement's a little fast, and this is how we're going to do that. So let's hit OK. And so if I come back to my base layer, you can see that movement's really fast. It's like very wavy almost, a lot of pulsing and everything, and we don't want that. I mean, maybe you do, and you can keep it right there. But for the purpose of this deliverable for the client, they want it a little more slower. So I'm going to come back over my render layer. And so since we created that base layer, let's go ahead and grab it. Click up in my project panel, click and drag that base layer and bring it down. And so since we created it at 10 seconds long and 60 frames per second, when we stretch this thing to 20 seconds, it's going to basically slow it down about 50%. So how we're going to do that is right click on our layer here and go to time and time stretch. And in the stretch factor, obviously it's at 100% right now on its normal speed. We're going to change that to 200%, and you can see it changes the duration to 20 seconds. Let's hit OK. And now we have stretched this layer to 20 seconds long. And so if I play it, it's a lot more slow, a lot more detail. You can kind of see everything happening here. It's not so wavy and fast. This is actually looking like clouds morphing, coming through, the light bursting through and everything. So this looks great. Let's come back to the beginning. Just a couple things we need to do here. I'm going to duplicate this base layer. So on my keyboard, I'm going to hit Command or Control D. And all I'm going to do with this one, with my blending mode still pulled up, I'm going to go from normal to add. And we're just going to brighten up those highlights quite a bit just to give it a more dramatic effect. I like how that looks right there. This is great. And really nothing else to do with this top level base layer. So on our bottom base layer here, we're going to add some color. And so over here in my effects and presets, making sure that bottom base layer is selected, I'm going to type in toner, and I'll pull up CC toner. Go ahead and double click that. And you have creative freedom here. I'm just giving you the tones that I used for this one, but feel free to use what you want. I mean, you can have a lot of fun with this, but we're going to keep it at tritone right now. On our highlights, I'm going to click on that box and type in FD C5AA. On our midtones, I'm going to click that box and type in 778 BAE, hit OK. And on our shadows here, I'm going to type in 030 E13. That looks good. So if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see we just kind of introduced some softer tones into this. It's not so stark blue. Maybe this is a little more natural looking in a sense. But yeah, it's just not so vibrant on the screen. And so I'm going to take this back to the beginning. Our toner's good. I'm going to twirl that up. And the last thing we're going to do, just to kind of introduce a little bit more color into this, down on my timeline, I'm going to right click, New, and Adjustment Layer. And I'm going to name this Color. And with that selected, I'm going to come over to my Effects and Presets and type in Gradient Ramp to pull up that gradient ramp. And with my color layer selected, I'm going to double click that. And on the start here, let's go 1920. We'll keep it there. And then on the Y, let's change that to 1055. And on the color box, I'm going to click that and change that from black to white. On the end ramp, let's go ahead and change the X to 6195. And on the Y, let's change that to -25. I'm going to click that color box and change that to just a stark bright red. And I'm going to change this from linear to radial. And so down in our timeline, let's change this color adjustment layer from normal to a multiply blending mode. And so it's just enough of a nice color here. If I turn it off, turn it back on, you can see we've really toned down those edges, but brought in like a nice purpley, kind of like that reddish tone that we've put in that gradient ramp. Looks really good. Zoom back out here. Center that up. If I play through here, now you can see this is looking really good. We fixed that loop. Everything's just kind of moving as it should. I love the look of this. Kind of those slow morphing clouds, the light bursting through. You get those deep shadows, almost that stormy look with kind of that sun coming through. And you can see we have that perfect loop on here. So this looks great. I hope you had a lot of fun with this one. I think this is a really cool look. Like I said, we can always come back into this base layer and adjust things as we need. So if I go to like my Fractal Noise and, play with the scale, say I drop this to 200, get really fine details there. That's a cool look as well. I'm gonna have to like re-render this, but you can see we have a lot more layers almost. You have that kind of pixel sorting effect, which is really nice. Even if I crank this like way up, say 2000, now you have like a really smoky, nebulous look, which is pretty cool. You'd have to kind of sharpen up those brights and everything, but I found this 700 was kind of the sweet spot to have that detail and definition while keeping it looking like clouds and everything with those light rays. So thank you guys for joining me on this one. It's so good to be back on these tutorials. I'm excited for what's to come. As always, if you have some ideas, drop them in the comments. I'd love to maybe help you figure out a problem that you're having within After Effects, or maybe you want to see some tips and tricks on visual design. I'm going to be looking at some different builds here, maybe some lower thirds, or building some things in Photoshop and Illustrator and bringing them over to After Effects to animate. But I would love to hear any ideas you guys have. So drop those in the comments. I'd love to say hi. You can always find me over on Instagram at Timmy Dwyer. I got that linked up in the description and probably popped up here right on the screen where you can find me. I'd love to say hi over there and see what you're working on. You can also find my assets. You can find the project files for this loop. Among other things, I have a free texture pack up as well over on my site, radloops.com. That's linked up in the description. Go check that out. Some really cool stuff over there for free. And I'll be dropping some more things here pretty soon. Some more free textures, some elements you can use in your projects. I'm just trying to build up that library for you guys because I just want to give you things to create with. I want to make your lives easier. I know building everything from scratch can be time consuming, especially when you're on deadlines. So if this can help you in any way, or any of the assets we build here are helping in any way, then I feel like I've accomplished what I needed to. So thank you guys so much. Can't wait for the next one. I will see you then. But until then, have the best day.